It's 10 times the terror.
Hello there. Getting old and senile.
I think it'd be a good idea before we go on for Paul and I, just before we ask you about yourself, we just give you a little bit of the fascinating history that we have. Paul, why don't you share with Gary a little bit about yourself and the books that you've written?
Okay, I'm just a retired Presbyterian minister, but I've had a strong interest in film, beginning with Michael Curtiz. And I did a master's thesis entitled The Rebel Hero in the Films of Michael Curtiz. And that was the basis of an article that was published in the Focus on Film journal. But I've been a Presbyterian minister. I've taught at, lectured at Vassar College, taught at Montclair State University for over 10 years. And I'm very interested in horror films. It's my main area of interest, and especially Hammer films. So I have two books I've done. I've done one book on Terence Fisher and another book on Christopher Lee. And
maybe I should be interviewing you.
Right.
Seriously, that's quite impressive work there, I must say.
And Ralph and I have been, compadres with sci-fi and fantasy and all of this. So this was a kind of a dream of something to do. And in our elder retirement years, this is what we're playing around with.
Well, great. You seem to be having a lot of fun, which is the important thing, right?
When I met Paul in 1982, he said, "So what do you like to what do you enjoy? Because we were talking about getting into like ministry together." He said, "But what do you enjoy?" And I said, "Well, to tell you the truth, I love comic books." He said, "Really?" "Yeah, I love comic books too." And he said, "What kind of movies do you like?" So I thought I was going to shock him. So I said, "Well, did you ever see I Married a Monster from Outer Space?" He said, "That's a great movie." So we knew we would be padres,
Yeah,
that's great. That's great.
I taught for a while. I was a missionary in Central America and taught in a seminary in Costa Rica. And it was it was in the mid-'70s, in the whole wake of The Exorcist and The Omen and all these kind of movies, which I did not like. So I proposed doing a course entitled God and Satan in Contemporary Film. And that kind of launched it into some more. And then there was a journal called Christianity Today, and I didn't know I thought they were kind of on the conservative side, but I approached the editor and said, "What would you think about a Christian interpretation of horror films?" He said, "We'd love it. When can you have it ready?" But I would when Shock Theater came out in 1957. Actually, there'd been this low period where there was sci-fi, but no real horror, and everything was still under the onus of the McCarthy era, and they were rewriting everything. When you get a book that said edited for young readers, I knew you were in trouble.
Yeah.
Incredibly, The Hound of the Baskervilles, all great Sherlock Holmes, was out of print. Hard for people to realize that. It was literally out of print in that period. So was Dracula, so was Frankenstein. So there'd been none of this. I bought the first issue of Famous Monsters of Filmland off of the newsstand. And when Shock Theater came on TV, I was like 11 years old or something like this. And much to the chagrin of my parents, what I would do is I'd go to bed like at 8 o'clock at night and set my alarm to get up for the 11:15 showing of Shock Theater, and then go back to bed when it was over.
Yeah.
And
no VCRs in those days.
A whole generation had to do stuff like that, and our hearing became so acute because we'd have to keep the volume on so low.
Exactly.
Yeah, that we could barely hear it.
Yeah, right.
And you'd hope that the flickering of the black and white TV would not somehow be seen in your parents' room. We all went through that. What I find so amusing about that is that these TV stations just kind of on instinct logically schedule those movies late at night because they were scary movies and midnight and that kind of thing. Meanwhile, the largest audience for those movies were the little kids who had to go to bed at 8 o'clock or whatever.
Sure.
And it took a while before they realized, oh my God, even though it seems to make sense to put these movies on late at night, kids love them,
I remember it seemed like I had the magic genie back in 1978 when I bought my first $1,000 Sylvania VCR. It must have weighed 120 pounds. Gary, remember the first VCR you had, but the first time you taped something, you thought you were in another planet, right?
Well, here's the evolution. Okay, it's really weird. I guess everybody's is a little different, but maybe we all shared the same. It kind of began with Give a Show projector. When you were a kid, they had these little rinky-dink kind of things. Okay, eventually that became the 8mm Castle films that you were able to show. Next for me was when you got your first tape recorder, whether it was a little one or a little bigger one or whatever.
Right.
And what we would do at that point would be to tape the movies off of TV.
Right.
Yes.
So that's what also started that whole. This is just audio tape, just the soundtrack.
And even TV shows. I remember taping TV shows.
Everything. I was approached by the people who put out the Batman TV show because in the mid-'60s when that show came on the air, originally the producer did an opening narration in the first episode, and then years later that narration was missing from the prints or whatever, and they needed verification. So I, being Mr. Fantastic Television, Mr. Expert, they came to me and said, not only will I swear on a stack of Bibles that he said that narration, but I audio taped it in 1966. I gave a little dutiful little kid with this tape recorder, which meant I kept listening to that recording over and over. So there's no question. I got a free set of the Batman series out of it. It was gorgeous in Blu-ray. But yeah, that's what we. And then the next thing for me was really, if you were lucky enough to get into 16mm, okay, that you had to be kind of connected to people who knew people, whatever, and then you'd be able to get 16mm print. But around that same time, you're right, the video tape phenomenon came in. For me, I got into it with the reel-to-reel video. The larger format, the 1-inch tape, before Betamax and before VHS even came into it. And they were just 1 hour they were these big clunky tapes. But as much as I loved collecting 16mm, because, it was amazing to have that, you could tape things now that you couldn't get any other way if you had a videotape machine. So that was always, and then all of a sudden, Betamax and VHS came in, and now everybody was beginning to get into what we kind of were playing with in more primitive forms. Everybody was getting into cutting out the commercials and then waiting. Yeah, it was a whole way of life. Now those commercials are more interesting than the films.
What I also remember, and again in my thing, it's the first, I somehow talked my parents into the idea. I was going to get a full night's sleep if I went to, but then early got up, and they were not crazy about this. But what's the first? So I had heard about Frankenstein and Dracula. Again, I say when you got famous monsters of film in that period, they were not only talking about films that you hadn't seen, or films you never even heard of.
Oh yeah, there was the grand mystery between those two covers. You saw more incredible monsters and creatures, and you never knew what they were from. And I could remember my dad. Look at this. Look at this one. Like we were just going. It was like laughing one page after another of the more absurd creatures you could imagine. And where did you see that before? I mean, it was nothing quite like that.
Yeah. When we were kids.
Right in the midst of this, though, in terms of my evolution, The Curse of Frankenstein came out. It all happened in 1957. It was the year that sparked a whole horror film renaissance worldwide. But the trouble is, my parents weren't going to take me to see a movie like Curse of Frankenstein. I was 11 years old,
Yeah, I know.
And I remember seeing the ads for it and all this kind of stuff, and we were down in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and they had a great big display, came by with big posters. The Curse of Frankenstein will haunt you forever, and all this kind of stuff. I remember saying to my mother, "Can't we go see it?" No, all right. And of course, the next year, what comes out? Horror of Dracula.
Yeah.
Same thing. No, you can't. But all right. But the
what a
third
heartbreaker!
year.
Not
All right,
that.
guys, listen.
All
All right, listen, guys, we're going to get started here because
I'm going to finish this, Ralph. Let me finish.
That's important stuff. Come on.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
This is important.
Go ahead. So what happened
All
next?
right. So the third year, I'm now 13, so I'm a teenager. They come out with The Hound of the Baskervilles. It's the same group. It's Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, Hammer Film. And when that came out, I said to my parents, come on. Okay. You said no to Frankenstein. You said no to Dracula. I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. I've got to see this. So they relented and took me to it. And the rest is history.
But they let you see The Mummy the same year.
No.
Yeah, because Hammer did that. You see, maybe Sherlock Holmes was acceptable enough, but The Mummy would have been another horror picture. So
right, exactly. Yeah.
Trouble there too. Yeah. Okay.
Oh man. Well, let's get Gary on the
Those
show,
are all
okay?
fantastic movies, by the way. All of those early Hammers are magnificent, wonderful movies that I'll love till the day I die. So
I contacted Hammer Films on Friday asking if we can get an interview with them. I just thought that might be interesting.
Oh, with Hammer as they are now. Well, I mean, it's a different company. I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, they have their whole heritage, but just like any other company, I guess they're out to figure out what will sell today.
Yeah.
Well, my two books were Terence Fisher, Horror, Myth, and Religion, and then Good versus Evil in the films of Christopher Lee.
There you go. And they certainly both made enough really terrific movies in those areas. The Devil.
And you were able to retire on the royalties of those films.
Oh yeah,
all right, of course. But of course.
Hey, Gwen, are you out there? Gwen, she probably fell asleep listening to us.
No.
Hey, Gwen.
That's great. Too much fanboy stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
I don't know. When back in '76, I joined a sci-fi club that for the only reason was that they had the print of the original War of the Worlds film, and I can remember thinking to myself, "Can you imagine owning the film, the War of the Worlds, and showing it to people? How cool could that be?"
Yeah. I had the privilege of that. I owned a 16mm Technicolor print of the War of the Worlds, which was the most gorgeous thing you'd ever want to see. And I showed her. See, my 16mm collection of movies kind of got up to about 100 prints during its heyday. And the George Pal science fiction movies of the early 50s, which were all done in Technicolor, I was lucky enough to get Technicolor prints. Technicolor prints were different than Eastman color prints in the way they were shot and the way they were printed. They had a three-dimensional quality, and the film stock itself was like 3 times as heavy as normal celluloid. So those Technicolor prints were astonishing. And man, I had the early Hammers as well. I still have to this day, watch Hammer will come out and send the police after me, a 35mm Technicolor print of Horror of Dracula. Which is a million years old. I mean, like from the 50s, no doubt. It still has its beautiful Technicolor, because Technicolor really doesn't fade. But yeah, no, so believe me, I know what it was like to have that War of the Worlds, and people would. I had a When Worlds Collide in Technicolor as well. I would
beautiful.
Yeah.
So
really,
Gary,
really
why can't we find a good copy of Invaders from Mars?
Because the copyright holder on that, Wade Williams, has access to the original negative, and he hasn't made a deal. Interesting you bring it up now, because apparently Wade Williams has just, within about the last month or so, made arrangements to release some of his films to have beautiful new Blu-ray restorations. And Flight to Mars will be coming out. That was done in the early 50s. Also a Cinecolor movie like Invaders from Mars. So they're getting closer. The problem with that is that he has the original negative. some of the special effects footage had been removed over the years, and the material on that is elsewhere. But I believe they know where that is as well. So it can indeed be reconstructed and put together and delight all of us. Let's hope that happens within our lifetime. I keep telling these people, I say, the people who love these movies, we're getting older, and we're the main audience.
Yeah, sure.
We remember it, we love it, right? So please, move your cans on this. And
yeah.
A good friend of mine has been restoring the Day of the Triffids, and he's taking forever to do it. And I keep saying, he shows me where it's at. I say, oh my God, this is breathtaking. Oh my goodness, you've beautiful. But I say, please finish the job, because the world isn't getting the benefit of this incredible work you're doing and putting it together here.
You'd like to think there's a new generation is learning about these, that they now have the complete sets of all the Universal monsters. And, the most recent ones, the Frankenstein and Dracula, are restored, Blu-ray. Gorgeous, they're black and white.
They are
just
breathtaking
pristine.
Looking. Yeah. Also, let me draw your attention to what they're doing over at Warner Brothers with the Mystery of the Wax Museum they just released this year.
Just got it last night.
Absolutely gorgeous. Talk about the Curse of Frankenstein. They went back to the original separations, the 3 original separations on that, to do a restoration on it. The new Curse of Frankenstein run out tomorrow if you haven't gotten it already, because it's one of the most gorgeous-looking versions, restorations of a title.
Really?
It's spectacular. Right now, they have what they call the Rondo Awards. The Rondo Hatton was a famous horror actor from the 40s, and they give out these awards. Play the creeper, and they give out these little awards where they actually have his little, sculpted little visage there as the award. And Curse of Frankenstein is one of the main contenders for the best Blu-ray release of the year. A lot of other important films are going against it, including some films that I was involved in restoring. Fear No Evil and Ritual of Evil were 2 made-for-TV horror films by Universal. Fear No Evil was the very first made-for-TV horror movie ever made. Fantastic film with Louis Jourdan as a psychiatrist who explores and investigates the occult. And these films had been out of circulation for decades and decades. And I managed to get those out of Universal and get releases for those. I did commentaries for those. They're also up for, like I say, there's a lot of really cool movies lately that have been dug out of mothballs. And
Gary, where were you all our lives? I mean, you're the man that we want to go to a pub with and have a beer, yo.
The question I want to ask you here.
I am a monster kid through and through. I mean,
you've compiled the 100 greatest science fiction films, the 100 greatest horror films. I want to ask you, what's your number 1 science fiction film, and what's your number 1 horror film? I know the answer, but I want to.
Okay. Well, the number one science fiction movie that was chosen there was Forbidden Planet. Now, let me first say this. I mean, 2001 is breathtaking. It was probably my number 2 or 3. Quatermass and the Pit is one of the most astonishing. Talk about coming up with an alternate explanations for what the devil is. He's actually they're Martian insects. Fantastic. But Forbidden Planet would still have to ultimately be number 1, even though there are better made movies from a cinematic standpoint. Obviously, 2001. Come on, but Forbidden Planet, to me, had the most astonishing accumulation of science fictional ideas and thought-provoking notions, actually suggesting, with the race of the Krell, I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah. Oh my God.
That this super race, this all but divine race.
Oh yeah, we're going to do that.
It's incredible. This race destroys itself overnight when it finally invents machinery and technology that enables its inner id, its true inner detail to come out, and in one night it destroys itself. Now, when you think about what an astonishingly subversive concept that is, to actually say that here we have a race that's kind of parallel to ours, but advanced so far, and even a race that has advanced that they're almost like gods in comparison to we are. Even that race is still subject to these same negative.
No, it's a great theology.
Wow.
I want to get you on
incredible.
when I do Earl Holliman soon. I want to have you on the show with us to talk to him about that, because only he and the robot are alive. There's no one else. And you talked about all these astonishing things that the show had. Don't forget, it had the best astonishing legs you ever saw. I mean, Anne Francis was absolutely gorgeous.
I was right. I was thinking, we're not talking about Robbie's legs. We're talking about Anne Francis. No, the truth of the matter is, I have to say, watching Forbidden Planet on TV as a little kid on $1 Million Movie in Channel 9 in New York City, when I saw her running around the corridors at the end as the monster from the id is closing in, she's running around in a little miniskirt, and that's when I began to say, oh, I think I like girls.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, Gary.
It's things like that. You see these things in the movies, and all of a sudden, girls, pretty girls wearing shorts or short skirts. You go, okay.
Gary, listen to this. I go into a poster shop back in 1973, and I asked the guy. He's got the full. The movie poster, the original movie poster of Forbidden Planet in 1973. I said, "What would you charge me for that?" He says, "I'm going to have to charge you $35." So I got
it's a lot, but
that is worth a lot of money today.
Yeah. We all got a lot of good deals in the old days before these things really became, big. Although by 73, they were already beginning to realize that. Yeah.
Paul,
you could get great deals.
Paul, can you call up Gwen on the phone and ask her what's going on?
Evan?
There she is.
You're not taping this, are you?
Yes, I'm recording this.
Because this is better than anything we could have come up with.
No, what I wanted to say here, that that whole thing about the what happens in Forbidden Planet, that's such a biblical idea. That's the nature of sin. Yeah. And it spreads and destroys.
Oh yeah.
The pandemic.
Exactly. You could. There is so much in there.
I mean, that's a couple of sermons, not just one.
On top of everything else, and even apart from everything that we've just said, by the way, just by accident, it happened to invent the Star Trek formula of the captain and the crew on these deep space voyages. Yeah. And let's face it, Captain Kirk and Leslie Nielsen's character, they're the same guy. Right. They're the same guy. Oh, yeah. Even down to their sense of humor. They're
and you and I and Paul grew up in the 60s under Kennedy, and coming out of World War II, people were looking for hope, and we thought in the 60s that technology, just like the Krell, was going to bring us to the moon and bring us to a new world and make everything wonderful. And something dragged us down, which is called human nature. And we're just, and so this is the story of the Krell. It's our story, and it's a fantastic.
That's what's so interesting, and it's also suggesting something kind of sad that we have to resign ourselves to, which is, even as I say, even if we do evolve into gods versus what we are now, we still have to watch out for ourselves, because there's still that side of us that is capable of that kind of thing. So
free will,
when you think about it, when Dr. Strangelove makes that comment about what we're capable of, right? That's us. Forbidden Planet really ups the ante by saying, even if we evolve into godlike versions of ourselves, guess what? We still got that problem.
Well, Gary, isn't that the Twilight Zone? It's a good life. I mean, the little boy Anthony.
Little Billy movie wishing people into the cornfield.
The cornfield. Yeah.
By the way, I want to mention one thing about Earl Holliman before we leave Forbidden Planet, because he stole Mr. He was in the pilot. As great a movie as Forbidden Planet is, for all the reasons we've mentioned, poor Earl Holliman was reduced to playing the goofiest character, the cook who's just looking to get drunk, and he's comedy really. So as amazing a movie as that is, Earl's character in that isn't one of the more amazing aspects. However, what's interesting is that when he was first offered the Twilight Zone, which is the very first Twilight Zone that was ever done,
yes,
okay,
of course.
his first instinct, oh no, what am I going to be, a guy in a bunch of guys on a spaceship?
That's
again?
right. That's right.
What is it, whatever.
Yeah.
And then he realized, oh no. This is enabling me to look into myself and to whatever. And he realized there was a lot more going on there. But it's so funny because again, Forbidden Planet is, in my estimation, the greatest science fiction film for all the reasons we've mentioned. But it wasn't a shining moment for Earl.
Yeah. Well,
Well, again,
I think I need to mention to everyone that Gary, is a he wears a lot of hats. I mean, Gary's been around a long time. He's a film historian. He's an author. He's a screenwriter. I mean, you were the co-writer.
I have more. Apparently, I was just reminded of another one of my careers the other day, in that I'm also a professional comic book person as well, because I was the West Coast editor of Topps Comics for as long as it existed, and I actually kind of launched the line. I worked on the first book, and I did develop things for that. So, and I said, oh yeah, that's right, I have that too. But I'm a very lucky guy in that I was able to make a living and live very comfortably just working on all these fun, creative things one way or another. And I really have to give credit to that, to the company Topps, because I was a Brooklyn kid, and Topps was always like this mythical, wonderful kids company that created the bubble gum and the trading cards and all these things that made our childhood happy, right? So because I was a Brooklyn kid, and I'm still in school, I wrote my first professional piece of work was an article for the Monster Times where I played the creature from the Black Lagoon. It was Confessions of the Black Lagoon Creature. So I had to become the Black Lagoon Creature and actually say, yes, I was living on the Amazon for the first 200 million years of my life, and then the Hollywood agent found me. It was one of those guys. Well, it was a very humorous piece. As a result of that, I got a call from Topps, and eventually I wound up creating products for them as well. Most of them were funny, crazy humor products, but, wacky packages, garbage, all these kind of nutty things that we did. Yeah. But I became the guy who was sort of in charge of all the movie and television tie-ins. So I was the one, the guy who did all the original Star Wars cards and all those kind of things, because obviously I was interested in film. So even though you had to be good at all these things, you had to be an artist, you had to be this, and it was an incredible training ground for all kinds of creativity. But because I was interested in film and wanted to pursue a career in film, I wound up being the guy who was in charge of all that. At that same time, Topps was, God, they were really great because they enabled me to pursue my career as an author, writing books about films and television, whatever. And then when I wanted to go to California to pursue my career as a screenwriter, and I wrote the horror film Pumpkinhead. I did a few other things like that. And Topps was nice enough to let me move to California and still be Topps, still be on the executive payroll, whatever. And that's when I did more of the Topps comics work and all that stuff. So it really helped to have a company that appreciated your skills and supported you. And that enabled me to try my hand in all these other areas that I always wanted to, film and all of that. Yeah. So I was just very lucky that I found a wonderful company like that at the right time, and that they appreciated me, and it was a wonderful, relationship.
I had that experience. I had that experience as a guitar player. I made this little infomercial for a local cable company selling videos of how to play guitar. And Bender Guitar Company, the biggest guitar company in the world, picked it up and made it into, together, it made it into a national 10-year television show. And so I appreciate when you get a big company. Yeah. I want to ask you about Roger Corman. You worked with him, didn't you?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Roger Corman, is a legend in his own crazy way. He'll always.
He is a legend. Right.
And we mustn't forget one hell of a brilliant film director. We tend to think of Corman, the king of the bees, and this is true, and it's wonderful. But the man was a brilliant film director. Those original Edgar Allan Poe films, starting like with House of Usher, and anyway, Mask of the Red Death. Those movies. If you know anything about filmmaking, the way he moves his camera, that guy has an instinctive feeling for cinema, and that's why those movies are so good. So even though he was basically kind of a fun commercial producer who got off on hey, I do movies so quickly, I do this or whatever, he was an artist as well.
Well, for me, the quintessential film that he did, at least for me as a kid, that really scared the hell out of me was None of This Earth with Paul Birch.
Yes. My eyes are look at my eyes.
Look at my eyes.
My eyes are alien. What's great about that? Yeah, Corman started in the 50s with the grade B or grade D, what I call them, sci-fi movies, but they were interesting too. Attack of the Crab Monsters is a terrific movie with some amazing ideas, beautifully set up and directed little set pieces. You know, to this day, you could watch that and say, you have any? Yeah, I mean, you could tell the guy knows how to put a movie.
How about Beverly Garland with the shotgun saying, "So that's what you look like. You're ugly."
Yeah, you're ugly. Right. That's it. Conquered the world, which is a movie that's kind of out of circulation now because the rights owner Susan Hart doesn't want to put it out. But it's that movie, just like anything else that he did, has its charms. That's Lee Van Cleef in it too, by the way.
That's great. Great, and not of this world. It was a Halloween at Princeton University, and they were showing The Pit and the Pendulum, and
great movie.
Like every Thursday night, they would show classic movies. They would show the Flash Gordon serial, all this great stuff. This is all in the late '60s, and I can just remember, with that great scene in the Pit and the Pendulum where Barbara Steele gets up out of the coffin, and starts coming after Vincent Price. This kid behind me is going, I can't say it on our podcast, but he's going, holy, he's just panting, I guess, scared to death, and that was just so meticulously directed,
Yeah, that you could tell in that film, particularly in those scenes where Vincent Price is being lured deeper and deeper into the catacombs, just the way he directs that, it's evident in all of those films. You could see shot to shot to shot. You see, I know a lot of filmmakers. I know a lot of guys who just do coverage. They cover the story, which is the basic thing you need to do. But a real filmmaker lives and breathes through every shot and knows that one shot leads to the next, and has a whole idea in mind. And that was Corman.
And you had
for a guy that sort of he prided himself on being seat of the pants, but his work has all the earmarks of a meticulous artist. I have to say,
he's his own kind of auteur.
I gotta say, doing this for about 4 months now, getting in touch with a lot of guests and so forth, gives me another sense of my mortality. I mean, I'm sure you find this too. You go to try to find people from these films or even the Twilight Zones.
Yeah.
And they were gone 20 years ago. I mean, I was very fortunate last week to get in touch with Bobby Clark, the only survivor from Invasion of the Body Snatchers, who's going to come on. It becomes a more difficult task.
Well, I mean, you got to be. You're lucky if you go. Like I say, if they were young back then, you got a chance that they're like Richard and I are today. There's a good chance he's around. Now, I've been, for one thing or another, including a documentary that I'm finally finishing in the next couple of months based on the great composer Billy Goldenberg. Billy Goldenberg composed all of Steven Spielberg's original TV movie scores, the original Night Gallery pilot, Duel, the first Columbo episode, all that incredible work. And he was my favorite composer. When I heard his music, I fell in love with it, instantly. One of those love at first hear kind of things. And so I mentioned this just to bring out that, so many of the people that you want to interview are now gone or have recently passed, and you're so grateful when you get some that are still with us. Some of the great composers who are still with us, like Lalo Schifrin and some of these other guys that were his contemporaries. But again, so many, and people that had agreed to let me interview them and then passed on before I had the chance. Bradford Dillman, a wonderful actor who said, sure, okay. And then when it was time to do the end, he had passed in the interim, just whatever little time it was. And then he left me some of the scripts and whatever. Were nice of him. But so I know that feeling of like, whoops. I've done many commentaries where I've tried to go after these people from vintage shows, and they're just not.
The best of these films will endure. The same way that people used to think, well, if a book is 100 years old, will people still read it? Of course. I mean, you think of the flowering of the novel in 19th century England. Nobody's left alive from that era, but we still read those books. Dickens and so forth. And
particularly things of fantasy and the imagination. Those things tend to be timeless. I mean, whatever they are, and they have an appeal. That's what we're telling Richard Iyer earlier today. Your work is immortal because if you're in a Ray Harryhausen fantasy film, they'll be watching and loving those things forever. And horror and fantasy and sci-fi, those things have a special. For many years they were looked down upon. I don't have to tell you, when we were kids, it was like, this is like crummy stuff or whatever, and we were the ones who kind of made it acceptable and appreciated more. We
forgot to mention today with Richard when we were talking about Sinbad or many other great Twilight Zones or Day of the Earth, the music. I mean. Bernard Herrmann just brought that film to life with those incredible scores.
Well, it was interesting in doing this documentary about Billy Goldenberg. Of course, Billy worked with Bernard Herrmann. So many of the people I interviewed did. Here's a good one for you. The actor, director, extraordinary human being, Norman Lloyd? Norman Lloyd is like 106 years old now, but he's like the great guy who, among other things, he was a regular on St. Elsewhere. That's where people know. But he worked with Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock. He's the guy that falls off the Statue of Liberty in Saboteur, going, wow, whatever. Anyway, he's one of the most amazing people in Hollywood because he had such in-depth relationships with both Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock. And at one point, he had directed a TV movie called Companions in Nightmare, which Bernard Herrmann scored. And he had worked with Bernard Herrmann many, many times. He also worked with Billy. And I said, gee, how would you compare both composers? What would you say? And his whole view of Bernard Herrmann, he said Bernard Herrmann had a God's eye view. It was really, really strange. To some degree, he almost went outside to comment on the events in these bigger but very, very declarative and dark kind of ways, whereas Billy would go inside the character and would work inside out. Because both guys were giving us that amazing kind of a sound. That's why I love Billy's music, the way probably you fell in love with Bernard Herrmann's. There was something in what those guys did.
Oh, no, the Columbo music, I wish they would make a CD of the music. They were just as good as the shows.
Yeah, he established the musical signature of that show, which was very, very elegant, and it was all... here's the way it worked. He scored the villains. He did not score Columbo, because he was part of the storytelling is the villains are so larger than life. There's no way you could stop them. They have riches, they have power, they have beauty, they have elegance, they have everything. So he would compose these themes and scores that were majestic for them
and haunting, right?
Ignore
Very
Columbo
haunting.
because the plot ignores Columbo. The villains ignore him. They don't even think he has a chance. Whatever.
Yeah.
So how brilliant was it? it that he would do that. And,
Yeah.
and when he did that, he also brought in these avant-garde sounds whenever the murders took place. So you'd go from this beautiful, melodic, kind of elegant sound for the villain, and then in the murders, it would be all discordant and all crazy and all wild.
Yeah,
And it showed the
it,
range the composer had.
oh, it's
Those
wonderful.
are the best. Those
Yeah.
are the best ones. Yeah, the
Yeah,
early
it's
ones.
wonderful.
So,
The one with
Gary, well, we still have our time here. Tell us your number one horror film.
Oh, okay. I chose Horror of Dracula, or Dracula 58, if you will. That's the very first Hammer, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing Dracula film, and to me, that's the perfect horror film. I mean, we can go on with different artistic reasons why. Let's just say that it for me, it completely captured everything I wanted out of that story, because largely what you don't know about the Christopher Lee Dracula is to me so interesting. He is the fallen aristocrat, and we can see this in all those early scenes. He's courteous, he is whatever, and somewhere along the line in his life, something happened that turned him to this, and we don't know what it is. And the way the movie is done, it just functions beautifully in that we're seeing this man doing what he has to do. Okay, now that he's become this, but in those early scenes, we have the suggestion of something. The movie does. I mean, I got to just say one thing. Just like the more you see Horror of Dracula, the more you realize how good a movie it is. You don't have to go any further than the opening title, because the opening titles begin, think about this for a second, with this up angle on the falcon or the eagle, whatever it is, whatever. Okay, stationary. The credits are beginning. That great Dracula march goes along, and then midway through the credits, the camera starts to move away from that sort of majestic bird up there, that kind of prideful bird, down, 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 until you're in his crypt, and you see him, you see the blood on his name in the coffin or whatever. You have gone from the heights to the depths. A miniature movie right there in the opening credits. Now, this is
very good.
My imagination. I will also throw this at you as a little capper to what I just said. When John Van Eysen comes along and walks over to the castle for the first time, before he enters, he looks up at the falcon, and then he looks down at the crypt, and then he enters. So the filmmakers are reinforcing the symbolism that they suddenly brought in right in the beginning. And this still is under the radar a little. Just one of the million things about this movie that makes it brilliant, that just sort of goes by.
There's a great touch in that same point where he says the only strange thing was there were no birds chirping.
Right, yeah. It's like
the later sequence, right
right
after they have staked Lucy, you hear birds chirping.
Right. You're right. He does weird little things like that. There's people have questioned a lot about the movie. Gee, when Jonathan Harker stakes the vampire woman Valerie Gaunt, why didn't he stake Dracula first? Would have been certainly the more serious of the two dangers. And then why does Dracula go outside, have a smoke or something, and then come back and kill the guy? Why doesn't he just kill him right away? Well, there's an answer to that. There's actually two answers to that. One answer is, and I kind of think this is sort of cool. Well, he wanted to make sure that this guy didn't have an accomplice. He wanted to make sure the coast was clear, which was a smart thing to do. But that's a literal explanation if you need one. I just prefer the whole idea that this whole thing is now operating on a plane where that moment where John Van Eysen looks up and you see the shadow of the banister, and then you see each little flap getting in more as a shadow is coming down and covering, someone's coming down. The nightmare level of what that does, that's like something you would dream about in a nightmare. And the filmmaker said, I'm going to take a little leap of logic because I want to replicate that feeling. Everybody knows I could just have Dracula jump at him, but this is more, and that's what we've lost, the ability to take a little flight of reason like that to create something that resonates.
Yes.
I love the whole motif of later on in the film when Van Helsing and they're trying to guard the house against Dracula, all that sort of stuff. And Arthur Holmwood and Dracula are watching all the outside parts, and Dracula is already inside the house.
Yeah.
That is such a great.
And so beautifully done.
That goes on forever. That whole imagery of I'm concerned about the evil or the threat from outside, whereas the real threat is from inside.
Yeah, that works literally and figuratively. The movie ends on the conservative note because Dracula, being the symbol of being freed from the Victorian repression and all that, is ultimately vanquished, and we're kind of back where we're supposed to be, quote unquote. But that doesn't take anything away from the fact that what Lee embodied there, like talk about lightning and same thing with Cushing. Cushing playing this ultimate soldier of Christ, where he can jump over banisters and do all this sort of, stuntman kind of Errol Flynn stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
you can't picture Edward Van
exciting
Sloan
was
doing that.
Cushing.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But what I was going to say too in that, and all that is a great touch. I find theologically, in the older films, when you hold up the cross, Bela Lugosi turns away and so forth. And then postmodern horror, the vampires, they just sort of laugh at the cross.
Yeah. Well,
what is so significant in horror of Dracula is that the people who are under control of the vampire, they can't turn away from the cross. They have to stay looking at it. Mm-hmm. Remember that thing with Lucy?
When you speak
she can't turn away.
When you speak of Peter Cushing,
and at the end there too.
I guess you both know that when they were going to do The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original actor they were going to choose was Spencer Tracy. Mm-hmm. And they said you can't have Spencer Tracy come out of the plunge.
They also considered Claude Rains, who had done a number of roles where he had played the devil or had played an angel, where there was a sense of, the audiences will accept him as something otherworldly. But they wisely decided there's nothing as good as an unknown face who's just so
like
perfect.
Michael Rennie. And I was going to say, when you're talking about Peter Cushing, I think he's one of the few people I think could have been a second for Rennie. I mean, he has that look and that kind of acting skill.
Those high cheekbones, right?
Yeah. And talking about The Day the Earth Stood Still, I want to close here. But listen, we have so appreciated you coming on.
It's fun. Well, it's just like a bunch of fans talking about the stuff they like,
You're not getting away from us, Gary. We're gonna get you back, okay?
That's fine. Well, get back to me. Let me know. I mean, if it can work into things, that's fine. That's
all
cool.
right. Well, thanks so much again for coming on, and
thank you.
My
pleasure.
Best. We'll talk again.
You too, guys. Terrific.
So, you met your match today.
Oh, it was great.
Thank you for listening to
It's 10 Times the Terror.
the podcast.
You are impossible.
Well, you're well-intentioned, but totally wrong. Thank you for listening to 10 Times the Terror. This podcast would not be possible without listeners like you. You can find out more about our podcast by visiting our website, 10timestheterror.com. That's 10xtheterror.com.